Hi, friends. I'm your old pal Papa Dale once again. I'm a retired pastor, teacher, theologian, and professor with over 50 years of service to the Lord Jesus Christ. My name is Dale Warren. Professionally, I'm known in my writing and teaching as D.A. Warren, but my friends call me Papa Dale, and you can call me Papa Dale. You can see the details of my testimony, family, education, and ministry experience on other videos on this playlist. So for now, let's get right into today's topic, which is the book of Genesis. So this is the John Huss Institute Genesis lecture, and this is lecture number, 32? Yes, 32. And it is part of the Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Literature degree program for the John Huss Institute of Biblical Studies. So let's get right into it. Lots of different topics in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis, the Bible's first book, lays the groundwork for understanding God's relationship with humanity. It opens with the creation of the world, highlighting that God brought everything into existence out of nothing, ex nihilo, Genesis 1:1. That means just by the power of his mind and his speech, he brought all of physical reality into existence. The most memorized verse from the book of Genesis is likely Genesis 1:1 that speaks of this beginning. It says, quote, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." End quote. Now, this verse is widely known and often cited as it marks the opening of the Bible, introducing the creation narrative. The Bible continues on and says, "In 6 days, God forms the heavens and the earth," culminating in the creation of humankind in his image. In the Hebrew, the word for image is tselem, T-S-E-L-E-M. And you can see this in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. This creation underscores the special bond between God and humanity, who are entrusted with stewarding creation. Genesis 1:28. Humanity is called to be Yahweh's imagers, his avatars, as it were, acting as instruments through which he intends to order and administer the physical world in cooperative interaction with humanity. Genesis 2 focuses on the creation of Adam and Eve, by whom God intended to populate the earth. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 and verses 21 through 25. By establishing the first human family and his design for marriage, God invited humanity to participate in the creative process, laying the foundation for gender roles, family structure, and population growth. In Genesis 3, humanity's spiritual fall occurs when Adam and Eve choose to act contrary to Yahweh's instructions by eating from the forbidden tree. See Genesis 3, 1 through 6. Now, this act of rebellion marks the first instance of human sin entering the world. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was withheld until humanity could mature enough to handle it wisely. However, Adam and Eve's lack of trust and patience in God was exposed by the temptation of the serpent, which led them to prioritize their own will over Yahweh's will, resulting in a spiritual separation from God. See Genesis 3, 7 through 24. This condition passed down through the generations of their children and requires the spiritual healing of redemption and reconciliation through Jesus Christ. See Romans 5, verse 12. Now, despite this fall, God's redemptive plan unfolds through covenants made with the patriarchs. See Genesis chapters 6 through 9. And these chapters recount the story of Noah, who finds favor with God in a corrupt world. Genesis 6:8. God's judgment comes through the flood, which destroys a wicked people. Yet, Even in judgment, God's grace is evident as he saves Noah and his family, sealing a covenant symbolized by the rainbow. Genesis 9, 8 through 17. Now, Genesis 15 through 20 centers on the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. God's covenant with Abraham in Genesis 12 promises land, descendants, and blessing. Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Abraham's faith in particular highlighted when he is asked to sacrifice his son, foreshadowing the sacrifice of Christ. Genesis 22, verses 1 through 18. The covenant continues through Isaac and Jacob is also known as Israel, with Jacob's 12 sons becoming the foundation for the 12 tribes of Israel. The tribes are named after each son: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. See Genesis 35, 23 through 26. Except Joseph's tribe, which was divided into two and named after his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. See Genesis 48, verse 5. Consequently, the tribe of Levi is often excluded from the list when land inheritance is discussed, as the Levites were set apart for priestly duties and did not receive territorial inheritance. See Numbers 18, 20 through 24. Joseph's story, Genesis chapters 37 through 50, illustrates God's providence, showing how God uses even human evil to fulfill his purposes. Despite being sold into slavery by his brothers, Joseph rises to power in Egypt, ultimately saving his family from famine. This narrative reflects God's sovereignty and faithfulness to his promises. Genesis 50:20. Genesis introduces key doctrines about creation, sin, covenant, and redemption, all pointing to the ultimate fulfillment of God's plan through Jesus Christ. Now let's look at the book of Genesis with a more analytical eye. The book of Genesis comes from the Greek, Genesis in the Greek, and biblical Hebrew, Romanized Bereshit, meaning in the beginning. Latin is Genesis. I'm not going to try to pronounce all of those foreign names, but Genesis is the first book of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Old Testament. Its Hebrew name, I will pronounce this one, Bereshit, is derived from the opening words, in the beginning. Actually, the words in the beginning are all in that one word, Bereshit. See Genesis 1:1. Genesis recounts the creation of the world, the early history of humanity, and the origins of the Jewish people. It is part of the Torah or Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. Evangelical scholars attribute the authorship of the Torah to Moses around 1250 BC, while secular critical scholars suggest it was composed around the 5th century BC by unknown authors. Evangelicals believe it was only edited at that time by Ezra, who was arguably the most skilled and important of all Hebrew scholars, scribes, and priests, with the assistance of his team of scribes and priests. Well, Genesis is divided into 2 parts: the primeval history, chapters 1 through 11, and the ancestral history, chapters 12 through 50. The primeval history presents the author's understanding of the nature of the Creator and humanity's relationship with God. God creates a world that is good and suited for humans, but humanity corrupts it with rebellion called sin. God responds by destroying his creation, sparing only the righteous Noah and his family with a great flood, to reestablish the relationship between humanity and God, Genesis 6 through 9. After this great disaster came the events of Nimrod and the Tower of Babel and the dividing of the nations. This narrative is primarily found in Genesis 10 through 11. Well, Nimrod is introduced in Genesis 10, verses 8 through 12, as a mighty hunter before the Lord and the king. He is a descendant of Cush, the son of Ham, and is described as a powerful leader. Nimrod is often associated with the founding of several significant cities, including Babel, later known as Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar in Mesopotamia. He also expanded his kingdom into Assyria, building cities like Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, and Resen. Nimrod's story continues in Genesis 11, 1 through 9, with the account of the Tower of Babel. After the flood, humanity spoke a single language and settled in the plain of Shinar. Under Nimrod's leadership, they decided to build a city and a tower that reached to the heavens, to make a name for themselves and to prevent being scattered across the earth. Some scholars believe it was also intended to provide a high place to avoid any flood repeat. Well, God was displeased with their pride and disobedience, as he had instructed humankind to spread across the earth, and they were congregating in one place in a city. As judgment for this disobedience, he confused their language, causing them to no longer understand each other. This confusion led to their scattering across the earth, which resulted in the formation of different nations based on different languages. Evangelicals generally view Nimrod as a symbol of human pride and rebellion against God. His kingdom, particularly Babel, represents humanity's attempt to achieve greatness. Represents humanity's attempt to achieve greatness apart from God. The scattering of the people and the confusion of languages at Babel is seen as a divine judgment against this pride and a means to fulfill God's command let me read that sentence again. The scattering of the people and the confusion of languages at Babel is seen as a divine judgment against this pride and a means to fulfill God's command to fill the earth. And so God had commanded, fill the earth, and the people are saying, no, we want to get together in this city. See this in Genesis 1:28. That's the command. The spirit of pride and rebellion is still active in humanity and can be seen even in the last Bible book, Revelation, as the spirit of Babylon or Mystery Babylon. This story is often linked to the origins of diverse cultures and languages, underscoring the importance of humility and obedience to God's will. The ancestral history, chapters 12 through 50, recounts the prehistory of Israel at God's command. Recounts the prehistory of Israel, period. At God's command, Noah's descendant Abraham journeys from his birthplace, identified as Ur of the Chaldeans, which is very close to Babel, to the God-given land of Canaan. See Genesis 11:31 and chapter 12, 1 through 5. There, Abraham, his son Isaac, and his grandson Jacob live as sojourners. Jacob's name is changed to Israel, and through his son Joseph, the children of Israel descend into Egypt, 70 people in all with their household, with God's promise of future greatness. Genesis 46:27. They descend into Egypt to escape the famine that was happening in Canaan land. Genesis concludes with Israel in Egypt after several centuries, setting the stage for Moses and the Exodus. Now, the narrative of Genesis is punctuated by a series of covenants with God, progressively narrowing in scope from all humanity, the covenant with Noah, to a special relationship with one people, Abraham and his descendants, through Isaac and Jacob. Later, this narrows down again to the family of Jesse and to his son David, from whom came Jesus, Isaiah chapter 11, 1 through 10. Evangelicals generally believe that the book of Genesis covers the span of time from the creation of the world to the death of Joseph, and this includes the following key events. 1. The creation of the world and all living things, Genesis chapters 1 and 2. Number 2, the fall of man, seen in Genesis 3. Number 3, the story of Cain and Abel, seen in Genesis 4. Number 4, the genealogies from Abraham to Noah, seen in Genesis 5. Number 5, the story of Noah and the flood, seen in Genesis 6 through 9. Number 6, the Tower of Babel, seen in Genesis 11. Number 7, the call of Abraham and the patriarchal narratives of Genesis 12 through 50, including the stories of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Now, in terms of actual years, evangelicals who take a young earth creationist view often believe that Genesis covers approximately 2,000 to 2,500 years, assuming a literal interpretation of the genealogies, and that's what I believe. Those who take an old earth creationist view or a more symbolic approach to the genealogies may see the time span as much longer, potentially covering millions or billions of years, especially in the case of the creation of the world. That's because they don't believe in the omnipotence of God. In Judaism, Genesis' theological significance lies in the covenants that link God to his chosen people and the people to the promised land. Both Judaism and Christianity have developed a specialized genre of literature dedicated to interpreting and commenting on the Genesis narrative known as the Hexameron. We do not explore that, but I mention it as you may come across it in other studies. Now, important groups in Genesis include 1, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. 2, the matriarchs, Sarah, Rebekah, Leah, and Rachel. 3, the 12 tribes of Israel, the descendants of Jacob's 12 sons. 4, the Levites, the priestly tribes set apart for religious duties. And 5, the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land that was promised to Abraham's descendants. So we also have types of Christ found in Genesis. Now, typology, you'll remember from previous studies, is where a person, thing, or event foreshadows the coming or future existence of another person, thing, or event. And in this case, these are types of Christ that are found in Genesis. And number 1 is Adam, the founding human member. As the first man, Adam prefigures Christ, who is the last Adam and who brings life, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 45. Second type is Abel. His acceptable sacrifice prefigures Christ's own acceptable sacrifice of himself, Hebrews 11:4. Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek is a mysterious figure that is referenced in Hebrews and in Genesis, and he is both seen as both king and priest. He prefigures Christ's eternal priesthood. See that in Genesis 7, 1 through 3. And type number 4 is Isaac. His near sacrifice by Abraham shows Christ's sacrificial death, Genesis chapter 22. And then the 5th type is Joseph. His betrayal and rise to power prefigure Christ's suffering and exaltation. See Genesis 37 through 50. Well, other than the creation itself, arguably the most dramatic event and the most pivotal in Genesis is the flood of Noah. I know what you're thinking. Some people go, well, ho-hum. Modern people tend to think of it as a long ago event when it rained a lot. Big deal. The waters rose and people died. Waters always are rising and falling and people are always dying. But some of them went on a long boat ride and lived through it. Okay, cool. But the level of disaster, especially for the millions and millions not on that boat, cannot be overstated or even imagined, as well as the effect on the planet Earth. Now, the narrative of Noah's flood, also known as the Great Flood, is found in the book of Genesis, chapters 6 through 9 in the Bible. This story is so extreme, so powerful, that it is seared into the racial memory of all people everywhere across the globe. Every culture on every continent has an account of this event. The most isolated tribes in the deepest, darkest, most isolated parts of the steppes of Asia, or the deepest jungles of Africa, or the deepest jungles of South America, they all have an account of this event. All of the stories have all been corrupted over the eons of time, but the event itself of the worldwide flood disaster and the salvation of only a few is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. There's an accurate and detailed account of the event and the worldwide disaster, and it's found in the book of Genesis in the biblical narrative. Now, the Bible says that humanity had become increasingly wicked and corrupt, with rape, murder, child sacrifice, orgiastic sex, and cannibalism being common. The civilizations were infiltrated by Nephilim, human hybrids. All people were in the most evil rebellion to the Creator, and the earth was filled with violence, and all flesh had corrupted its way. Genesis 6, 5 through 12. Now, I mentioned the Nephilim. Who are they? Well, the story of the Nephilim is found in Genesis 6, 1 through 4. According to the Bible, they were a race of giants, or mighty beings, that existed in the days before the Great Flood. Here's a summary of their origin and the brief biblical account. As the human population began to increase on earth, daughters were born to men. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves from all they chose. In other words, they wanted to mate with them, and so they did. Now, the identity of the sons of God is debated among scholars, with some interpreting them as fallen angels, which I do. Others interpret them as descendants of Seth, Adam's son, and others as powerful rulers or tyrants. I believe that the evidence supports the fallen angels' teaching. Scripture says that Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. The Nephilim are described as, quote, heroes of old, men of renown, end quote. The term Nephilim is often translated as giants, though the exact meaning is unclear. This interspecies mating was an abomination to the Creator, being a corruption of his purpose and plan. Seeing the wickedness of humanity and the corruption brought about by these unions, God declared that his Spirit would not contend with humans forever, that he was limiting their days, to 120 years. This led to his decision to bring about the great flood to cleanse the earth. Now, the meaning of limiting the days to 120 years has been debated also. I'll just give you this little morsel to suck on. 120 years may be a reference to 120 periods of Jubilee, which 120 times a period of Jubilee, which is 50 years, would equal 6,000 years of human history. Maybe that's what it's referring to, but there's quite a bit of debate about that. Now, the story of the Nephilim is brief and somewhat enigmatic, leading to various interpretations and much speculation throughout history about their true nature and significance. Well, God decided to cleanse the earth of its wickedness by sending a flood to destroy all living creatures that breathed, Genesis 6:17, except for Noah, his family, and pairs of every kind of animal and a few more of some animals that had a special purpose. Yahweh found that to be righteous and blameless among the people of his time, and God chose him to survive the impending disaster, Genesis 6:8-9. God instructed Noah to build an ark of gopher wood, specifying its dimensions, which were 300 cubits long and 50 cubits wide and 30 cubits high, and he specified the construction details. See Genesis 6:14, chapters 14 through 16. Well, Noah was to bring 2 kinds of every animal, male and female, into the ark, along with enough food for his family and the animals. See Genesis 6:19-21. Side note, secular skeptics will dispute this account based on animal size, food requirements, or on other objections. But consider this. Perhaps the animals selected were all babies. Or perhaps God caused them to hibernate, like some bears do every year anyway. Couldn't the God who by his very thought and word created everything from nothing, and who sustains it by his own personal energy, couldn't that God also arrange the circumstance for this method of preservation of animal life? Couldn't he do that? I think he could. Now Noah, his wife, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, their wives, and the animals entered the ark 7 days before the flood began, according to Genesis 7:1-10. And then God himself closed the door of the ark, Genesis 7:16. And the floodwaters came from both the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven, and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, Genesis 7:11-12. Now, at this point, most Bible readers overlook the severity of the storm. They don't even think about it. But I'm going to challenge you to think about the worst hurricane imaginable times 100. And that's just the storm. Another activity was even worse. What does it mean when the Bible says, quote, the fountains of the great deep, end quote, were broken up? This is a totally astonishing event. This great deep, that's from where most of the water and disaster came. Trillions times trillions times trillions of gallons of water were stored under the earth in the time of Noah, and even today a great deal of water is subterranean. You can drill a well in most places on the earth, and if you go deep enough, you're going to find water. Some places you don't have to go very deep at all. And this liquid disaster that exploded forth in great fountains of the deep, they exploded forth in gigantic, volcano-like fountains by the millions, all over the world. Millions of geysers shooting into the sky. Now, we've all seen videos of geysers like Old Faithful in Yellowstone Park, USA. We've all seen video of exploding volcanoes like Mount St. Helens, right? Imagine, if you will, millions, yes, millions of volcanic torrents of water screaming miles into the sky, each with the power of 10,000 pressure washers, only for the water to cascade back to Earth with the force of 1,000 Niagara Falls. As the water accumulated back on the ground, rushing torrents formed rivers everywhere, which tore into every stationary thing, washing away all remaining people and every living, breathing thing. Tore up the land. Just take a look at the Grand Canyon in the United States, in Arizona. That's the result of the great torrents of water tearing across the land. The waters rose, covering even the highest mountains by more than 15 cubits. See Genesis 7:19 through 20. All living, breathing creatures outside the ark perished. Genesis 7:21 through 23. And after 150 days, the waters began to recede. The storms stopped, the fountains stopped, and the waters began to recede. And the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, Genesis chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. Noah sent out a raven and later a dove to see if the land had dried. The dove returned with an olive leaf, indicating that the waters had subsided, Genesis 8, 6 through 12. Now God commanded Noah and his family to leave the ark and release the animals so they could repopulate the earth, Genesis 8, 15 through 19. And Noah built an ark and offered burnt offerings to God, who promised never to curse the ground again because of humans or destroy all living creatures with a flood. God established a covenant with Noah and his descendants, symbolized by the rainbow. Other people have tried to hijack the rainbow in my day, but this is a covenant sign from the Creator, the rainbow is. And it's a sign that he would never again flood the entire earth. See Genesis 9, 18 through 17. So listen now, the flood narrative is significant in various theological, moral, and symbolic ways. It underscores the themes of human sinfulness, divine judgment, mercy, and the promise of renewal. As previously mentioned, the story also serves as a foundational story in many cultures all across the world, influencing subsequent religious and cultural traditions. Now keep in mind, as great as this disaster was, it illustrates how badly God hates sin and how much he loves those who will cooperate with him in his plan and purpose, and he will save them from such a disaster. One of my personal favorite verses is Genesis 50:20, which is right at the end of the book of Genesis, at the end of the ancestral section of the book of Genesis. And the verse says, "You meant it to me for evil, but God meant it to me for good." And God only has in his heart ultimately our eternal best interest for good. Now sometimes there's a conflict between what it seems like to us is our temporal current best interest and what God knows to be for our eternal best interest. And so we need to try to sync our hearts and minds up with God and get in full cooperation with him. So, this has been your old pal Papa Dale, and this is the year 2024. And so you are supposed to, if you're intending to be a part of the Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Literature program from the Jan Hus Institute, you need to turn to the lecture notes and read through the lecture notes thoughtfully, and you'll see them below this video and in the comments below this video, and you can also find them in the video transcript. So make sure you read those. And until the next time that I see you, this is your old pal Papa Dale signing off and saying, I'm going to pray for you. And I'm going to pray that you will be well and that you will be blessed. God bless.